How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
There's a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
I don't know where else this would fit, but I suppose now is as good a time to tell you as any. I saw this great interview with the Wachowskis on DeVry University, and they talk about a lot of stuff. But one of Lana's first screenplays was The Princess Bride. She had worked really hard, read the book, and was like a huge fan of the book, and had written out the screenplay. Was like, this is perfect, like everything's already here, I can already just do all this. And she wrote the whole thing, basically started pretending to be like a publishing company or like some kind of production company, and like started calling up Hollywood studios and stuff. And then she said that she got William Goldman's number, and she was like, okay, well, at this time she was like, he's surely got an answering machine, so he's not going to answer, so I'm going to leave him a message. So she wrote out like this huge long introduction and like why she's the best person to adapt The Princess Bride. This was when she was like in college, I think. So then she called, and she said immediately somebody picked up, was like, this is Bill Goldman. She was like, and she's like, I have adapted The Princess Bride for the screen. And then Bill Goldman was like, I don't know how the fuck you got this number. I've adapted Princess Bride for the screen, and it's going to make a lot of money. Bye.
I mean, he was right.
That was my next question, was like, where in the timeline did this fall?
You can't fault him for that, because like, you know, he adapted his book, you know.
And William Goldman is one of the, I don't know, most famous screenwriters of all time. So she had to kind of assume that he was probably going to do that.
We also, I don't think, talked about that their first meeting with Steven Spielberg was, or did we, on Bound, when they were making Bound. They
really?
Yeah, she told that story and said that they were like really stunned. He's like, "Oh, you're making your first picture," and they're like, yeah." You get like really nervous. They're like, "Do you have any good advice?" And he said, "Wear comfortable shoes."
Thank you.
That's great advice, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to be on your feet for like 15 hours a day, comfortable shoes is probably the way to go.
Yep. Yeah.
You guys want to start a podcast?
Yeah, we'll actually start the real podcast now. Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast that explores the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. And if you've ever wondered, if you've gone through the past 2 years without getting COVID, and you've ever wondered what it's like having it, but only in your eyeballs, well, this is the episode for you. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
Wow, he's starting right out of the fucking gate with this. I'm your co-host, Justin Bishop. We're joined, of course, by Mr. Todd Davis.
And I'm ready to be a real race car driver.
And we're joined by special guest, Miles Griffin. Welcome back to the show, Miles.
Thanks, guys. It is always amazing to be here.
Get that weak shit off my track.
Probably one of the best lines in the movie.
I'm really glad you're here, Miles, because I feel like Gary's going to be a lot today.
When isn't Gary a lot?
Yeah, that's true.
I was dealing with Gary all last night.
Oh yeah. Well, do we need to know this story?
Look, I'm still a little sore in the back area, but you know.
Heyo.
So welcome
the
to
back area for carrying this show.
Welcome to part 5 of our series on the Wachowskis. Last week we took a little bit of a detour on a film that they did not direct, but were very heavily involved with, V for Vendetta. And as we discussed during that episode, after that daunting task of bringing these huge Matrix sequels, Matrix 2 and 3 to the big screen, the Wachowskis wanted to take a brief hiatus from directing. They focused on the producing writing side of that production of V for Vendetta, allowing their longtime first assistant director, James McTeigue, to make his feature directing debut. But after V for Vendetta's release and relative success, the siblings were ready to jump back into the directing pool. So how to follow up a franchise as monumental as the Matrix trilogy? Well, as they always seem to do, the Wachowskis bucked all expectations with their choice, making something that is about as far from the Matrix films as possible, at least aesthetically speaking. The resulting film was a failure at the box office and with critics, but in recent years, it has gained a cult following and is considered by many to be the Wachowskis' most underrated and misunderstood film. And the movie we're talking about is, of course, Speed Racer.
He's going to be the best.
For my family, racing's everything.
I watch you do some of the things you do. You just take my breath away. I'm so proud to be your mom. Speed Racer, what are you thinking?
That race was fixed. Someone's trying to crush everything in my life that matters to me. How can we fight this?
The only way you'll ever stop these people is to bring them to justice.
Racing's the only thing I know how to do, and I gotta do something. This isn't a game. These people play rough.
That's why I'm going with you. Let's go. Go, Speed, go!
Speed, get out of there! I can't move! Speed! That's my boy. Speed Racer is back.
Hubba, hubba.
Speed Racer, slow down.
Was the first Blu-ray I ever bought.
Really?
It's a film that I saw, and because it was still the early years of Blu-ray, and I had a Blu-ray player because I had a PlayStation 3. And it's the first movie that I saw that I watched something and I was like, I need to see this in the best possible resolution when I'm watching this at home.
That Blu-ray is actually kind of hard to find now. It's out of print. I mean, you can find it from third-party sellers, but you can't find it in stores. I'm anxiously awaiting a 4K release.
Absolutely. I didn't realize it was rare. The first DVD I bought, or was gifted actually when I got my first DVD player, was The Matrix.
Nice.
Yeah, The Matrix and Fight Club. Actually, my parents got me those for my birthday. This was 1999, so those were two big releases when DVDs were first starting to kind of blow up.
My first DVD was, I think, Dark City.
Nice.
Cool.
Which is pretty close to The Matrix, honestly.
Right.
I think mine was Spawn.
Yeah,
97?
let's just keep talking about this.
I thought we were going down the list.
Gary, what was your first DVD?
My first DVD, I have no idea. Honestly, I don't remember.
Good story, Gary.
I was trying to help you move this along.
Yeah.
The Speed Racer is based on the 1960s manga. Do you say manga or manga, Miles? You're a nerd.
Doesn't matter.
No, what do you say personally?
I say manga, but
okay.
I also do not care.
Okay. I was just curious.
I say manga.
Now you've already offended the guest right up
Gary,
top.
Gary, what do you say?
I think I usually say manga.
All right. Anyway, the Speed Racer is based on the 1960s manga and
my
anime
first Blu-ray
series
was
of the same name, which was created by Tatsuo Yoshida. Originally published under the title Mach Go Go Go, which just rolls off the tongue. Speed Racer started its life serialized in the popular manga magazine Shonen Book in 1966. So while the plot of the comic, which was basically an ambitious young man becomes a race car driver, was based on a previous comic that he had written called Pilot Ace, Yoshida took inspiration for the character designs by two films that were really popular in Japan at the time in the mid-60s. Those movies were Viva Las Vegas and Goldfinger.
Oh, wow.
So basically, his main character's look was based on Elvis Presley's race car driver character in Viva Las Vegas, complete with a black pompadour and the handkerchief, the kind of neckerchief, while James Bond's Aston Martin DB5 from Goldfinger, the famous Bond car, the most famous Bond car, served as inspiration for Speed Racer's gadget-filled Mach 5.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually.
I think
that makes for a good pitch. Like, hey, imagine if like this Elvis Presley character was driving a.
Imagine Elvis Presley as James Bond.
Yeah, Elvis Presley as James Bond. Like, all right, that sounds like fun.
So it wasn't long before the comic's popularity led to it being adapted into an anime. This was pretty common at the time. Running for 52 episodes from 1967 to 1968, the anime proved to be an even bigger success than the comic, resulting in the series being imported to America. So in the series, in the original anime series, the main character's name was Go Mifune, which was an homage to Japanese film star Toshiro Mifune, who is in all the Akira Kurosawa movies, one of the biggest movie stars Japan has ever seen. And then, of course, his name was Americanized into Speed Racer as his actual name in the American release. So the series, which was dubbed and pretty significantly edited for American audiences, debuted in the US in the summer of 1967 and proved to once again be incredibly popular, staying in syndication for years. I mean, I remember growing up in like the 80s and 90s and seeing it still in syndication pretty regularly.
Oh yeah, especially when Cartoon Network was first, popping off, and they were mostly recycling, the older Hanna-Barbera and the 60s and 70s cartoons. This was in heavy rotation, and even this style of popularizing a Japanese anime or Japanese animated show into something that has become part of the American, pop culture zeitgeist. I mean, that happened with Robotech, and it happened with Battle of Planets, and something that would continue to happen pretty frequently for a good while before we got straight actual adaptations or rather translations.
So not unlike V for Vendetta, the road to bring Speed Racer to the big screen was a long one. In September of 1992, Warner Brothers actually optioned the rights to a film adaptation of the series in development with Joel Silver's Silver Pictures. We got Joel Silver on board once again. This Wachowski series could also be a Joel Silver series at this point. Yeah. Between this and the Shane Black stuff that we covered last Christmas.
Oh yeah.
Was that the last time I was on? Was during the Shane Black month?
Maybe that was last year around this time because it was right before Christmas. So
you're our favorite Christmas guest.
Yeah, it's not really Christmas yet, but maybe every holiday season we'll just do Joel Silver movies. Call it Silver Bells or something.
Hey,
got it.
That's clever marketing.
I like it.
So in October of 1994, it was announced that Henry Rollins had been offered the role of Racer X with Julian Temple set to direct. Now, I don't know if you guys know who Julian Temple is. He is, if you know who he is, he's a really odd choice to direct Speed Racer, at least in my opinion. He's this English director who's most well known for his music documentaries and music films, including the 1979 Sex Pistols film, which is it's actually a mockumentary called The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. It's really worth watching if you're into especially punk music of that time. It's pretty fun. And I guess his connections to the music industry, especially on the punk side of things, because he directed not just The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, but he directed movies about the UK subs and about the Clash and stuff. He had a lot of connections in that world. So I guess that might explain why he would choose to cast Henry Rollins as Racer X. I can't think of any other reason why anyone would.
I think it's kind of a fun choice. If you think about the template they went with, even with Matthew Fox, the kind of figure that he cuts, I can see looking at Henry
Rollins has a strong jawline.
Yeah, I can see, especially when he was super cut. I can kind of see the reasoning, especially
he's still pretty cut.
Yeah, if you come from
even as a 65-year-old man,
I see it, and I like him as an actor too. He's pretty fun.
Yeah, he's fun. So the following year, Johnny Depp was cast in the lead role, with production set to begin in October of 1995. And you got to think where Depp was at the time in the early to mid 90s.
I was going to say that's my good question. When was this? Yeah,
Scissorhands was 1990, so this is a few years after that, but still at the height of his stardom. But by August of that year, Depp requested that the studio grant him time off for quote unquote personal business, which delayed production. And due to that delay and a quickly rising budget, Julian Temple ended up leaving the project, and without a director, Johnny Depp soon left the project as well, which is ironic because it was delayed because of Johnny Depp. So he caused it to be delayed. Julian Temple left because of the delay. Johnny Depp left because Julian Temple left. So the studio started looking into other directors, and they actually considered Gus Van Sant as Temple's replacement, which to me is another really odd choice.
Yeah.
Looking at his filmography, he had just directed To Die For and would soon release Good Will Hunting, neither of which screams this guy should direct an anime adaptation about racing.
The only thing I can think is that it was maybe going to be a more realistic approach to that kind of
I
driving.
guess. I don't know. Like,
I don't know.
Really
it's
bizarre.
It's also possibly because they were doing smaller pictures, they would be easier, cheaper directors to include. I mean, big studios often do those things where a prominent indie director has been doing some work for a little bit and gets attached to a big studio project.
Yeah, but I feel like that's more common now than it was back in the 90s. Like, it's a big thing you see with the Marvel movies.
Sure.
But I don't know that it was as common
that decade.
Yeah, I mean, that was 98, but that was so that was after this. But yeah, but Psycho wasn't exactly, it was a big name, but not exactly a high, like super high budget. Not as high a budget as Speed Racer probably would have cost.
Oh, probably not.
But it eventually Van Sant left because the studio wouldn't let him write the script. They wanted him to direct, but didn't want him to write it. So the studio also briefly hired Alfonso Cuarón as a director. And this is a cycle that would kind of continue over the years that the film was spending in development hell. It would just go through one director, one cast member after another, just spinning along. And then in September of 2000, Warner Brothers hired music video director Hype Williams to direct the project, with writers Christian Gudegas and Paul Schuring working on the screenplay. And that sounds awesome, honestly. Like this is right after Belly. Belly was 98, I think. And you guys know I love Belly. I think Belly is fucking awesome. And I can just imagine a Speed Racer adaptation with Hype Williams's visual style. I would have been down for that.
It does sound like fun.
But that version failed to move forward as well, which led to the director and the writers eventually leading the project. So you see, this is history repeating itself over and over.
He was trying to hire DMX as Racer X.
I would have been fine with that. That would have been great. Get Nos in there as Speed. I don't care. That would have been awesome. So the project started gaining traction again in June of 2004 when Vince Vaughn spearheaded the revival of the project, presenting a more character-focused version of the story. And Vaughn was, of course, also cast in the film as Racer X and signed on as an executive producer. And like previous attempts, this version of the project failed to move forward as well, and Vaughn eventually departed because it just wasn't going anywhere.
I could see Vaughn as Racer X as well.
I could too. I think he would be good in it. But of course,
he just wouldn't fit in a race car. The dude's huge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Matthew Fox is he's not as tall as Vince Vaughn, I guess. Vince Vaughn's like 6'7" or 6'8".
Yeah, he's a big guy.
Big dude. So Joel Silver's still got the rights to the movie at this, or Warner Brothers, and Joel Silver is still working on it. This whole time, Joel Silver's involved. So he's still determined to get this project off the ground. So, trying to move forward with it, he turned to his tried and true collaborators, Lana and Lilly Wachowski, who signed on to both write and direct the film in October of 2006. So in a Variety article that was reporting the news at the time, this is what Joel Silver was quoted as saying. He said, "I've struggled with this movie for a long time, but when Larry and Andy came across with their ideas and vision, it was so fresh and original that you wonder why nobody else thought of it." So he didn't just sign them on. He approached them. They pitched their version of this story, and that was enough to get the ball rolling. And they wanted to do something very different from the Matrix movies. And the hope was that with this film, they would be able to reach a broader audience than they had with the R-rated Matrix movies. So with the Wachowskis on the board, the directors began assembling their list of collaborators, the most important of which I think in this case was visual effects supervisor John Gaeta. He was the guy who invented the Matrix's bullet time effect and who had won an Oscar for his work on this film, because there was no way that this vision was going to come to the screen without some sort of massive special effects.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Something like this. I mean, based on a cartoon alone, but like, the pitch, like we talked about earlier, just screams big budget special effects action type stuff. So yeah, no, that makes sense.
I don't think I mentioned this before, but I also, another thing I found with them is like a phone interview that somebody did. It must have been for an article or something, but I guess this is as good a time as any to mention it. One of the things that attracted the Wachowskis, they said, really was like what they could do with the movie. Like they were more intrigued by visually, aesthetically, obviously what they could do with it. But the quote from the phone interview that Lily gave, no, I'm sorry, this was Lana, said, we knew this movie was dangerous. We're very visual thinking audiences. We're often drawn to ideas that stimulate the imagination visually. And unfortunately, we work in a medium that is one of the most rigid aesthetically. So if you go to an art gallery or particularly a modern art museum, you would experience an unbelievable range of aesthetic possibilities. But in cinema, all movies typically look the same. I mean, maybe they'll make one a little greener or a little more dark, but they're still all pretty identical. We've always thought it was interesting that no one's done anything with the language of editing. It begins with a capital letter and ends with a period every time. And we thought, well, because of computers, we can transcend this language of cinema to stretch out more of the way we experience the world. We don't experience in grammar, but more of a rushing stream of consciousness and connections. Wouldn't it be amazing if we can use this movie to create sequences in a film that are just rushing montages that simulate the way we actually experience the world, particularly in something like race or in sports, or where there's always swirling memories, experience, strategy, conflict, all woven without falsely constructed sentences.
I kind of love that because I love the idea that they're not only not wanting to repeat themselves, but they're not wanting to repeat what any other filmmaker has done, which you don't get a lot of. You don't get a lot of filmmakers who are like specifically trying to go against the flow or create their own, not even against the flow, but create their own lane to, I guess, make a weird driving reference in a movie about driving. But that's what I like about them. And we'll talk about this in their other movies after this as well, I think. But the Wachowskis they love taking chances and they love going against expectations, not only expectations that are put upon them based on their previous work, but just expectations on what a movie should be.
Yeah. In that same interview, they talk a lot about how, like, that everybody's a slave to the camera, but they don't have to be anymore because of the computers. That they, when they really started digging into the concept of the movie, they were like, we can control everything.
Which is that probably stems from like their use with the virtual camera in the Matrix sequels, especially in that Burly Brawl sequence that we talked about. That was kind of, they created that virtual camera for that sequence, but there are so many other possibilities for that technology.
Yeah, they literally said, like, we can now, besides just the plane that we're filming on, we can create like what's in the grain on the out of focusness, the lens flares. All of this becomes an aesthetic choice instead of what we can actually produce physically.
Right. So while well-known actors such as Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Shia LaBeouf, and Zac Efron were initially considered for the role, the lead character of Speed would end up being played by Emil Hirsch, who is still early in his career at this point. He had recently appeared in The Girl Next Door and Lords of Dogtown, which I think were probably the first like significant roles that he'd had.
Yeah.
And to prepare for the role, he watched every episode of the original series, which makes sense. And he also visited the Charlotte Motor Speedway for some racing.
Nice.
I think he met with like Jimmy, what's his name? There's a race car driver named Jimmy John. No, that's the sandwich guy.
Yeah. I think there is a Jimmy Johnson, right? Or something.
Jimmy Johnson.
I think it is Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah, I think that's who he met. He met one of the NASCAR racers who was big at the time. I know that we are in South Carolina to our listeners, but I don't know shit about NASCAR. I think it's boring as hell. Like, really
I'm right there with you.
It's like just cars going in a circle. Now, if they were on roads like in this movie that look like the Rainbow Road from Mario Kart, where you could just fly off and die at any point, it would be a lot more entertaining to me.
Oh, I would watch this every single week.
With that said, raise hell, praise Dale.
Absolutely.
So for the role of Trixie, several actresses were considered, including Kate Mara, Rose McGowan, and Hirsch's Girl Next Door co-star Elisha Cuthbert. What happened to her?
She's on she's on this show on
Is
Netflix. The one with Ashton Kutcher.
The ranch.
Is she on there?
She's on there.
Well, the role would eventually go to Christina Ricci. and who looks like a living anime character anyways.
Yeah.
I was going to say the one out of those, like I could definitely see Rose, like somehow her look feels like it could work. But
yeah, I think the main reason that Rose McGowan didn't get cast at the time is because she had recently had a lot of plastic surgery done.
Oh yeah,
she's had quite a bit over the years, but she had it was drastic enough at this time that the producers were actually worried that people wouldn't know who she was. Like she
was in like a bad car wreck, right? Like
yeah, I don't know if that was at this time or not, but I know she was at one point. But yeah, the producers they're like, yeah, people know who Rose McGowan is, but they were worried that they wouldn't see her and know that it was Rose McGowan. Like it was that drastic of a change.
Oh wow.
And the rest of the cast was filled with veteran American actors such as Matthew Fox, John Goodman, and Susan Sarandon, and international stars such as German actor Benno Furman as Inspector Detector, Australian actor Kik Gurry as Sparky, British actor Roger Allam, who of course had appeared as Prothero in V for Vendetta. He plays the villain Royalton, and then Korean singer, songwriter, producer, actor Rain as the two-faced rookie racer Tagokon. Speed Racer was Rain's feature film debut, but the following year he would star in the Wachowski-produced, James McTeigue directed Ninja Assassin, which we talked a little bit on our V for Vendetta episode. Huh?
I said I'm a fan of that movie.
I've never seen it.
It's fun, as I recall.
It's just fun. Yeah, it's a fun movie.
Yeah, they basically, from what I read, they cast him in Ninja Assassin because of like the brief fighting scene that he has here. They saw some potential in him.
I don't know that he's made any other. Asked Keanu, by the way, for like Racer X, but he turned it down.
Oh, that might have been cool.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's one person I couldn't really find a lot of info on how he got involved with Matthew Fox. So I imagine it was just a boring. My agent sent me a script. I did an audition.
Right.
Nothing very.
Besides the strong jaw, I feel like that voice has to be.
Yeah, and he's got a good voice.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, it's very important to know that Scott Porter, who is also Rex Racer, and then Matthew Fox is Racer X, they share a birthday.
Oh, interesting.
That's wild.
Fun.
Yeah. I mean, we can stop the show now because
that's it.
And I'm at Davis on all the socials. Thanks so much, guys. Good night.
So Todd, while we're on the subject of cast members.
Yes.
What you got for us today? What you got for us this week?
Well, this week in who am I trekking with? Really, this is another thing. I can't decide if it's the Wachowskis that hate Star Trek or if everyone on Star Trek hates the Wachowskis, but they seem to just not have a lot of crossover at all. But I don't think we've discussed at this point. Michael, I always mispronounce it. Giacchino. Giacchino. Thank you.
Yeah. I was about to say, because when we started talking about this, I was like, surely he knows the composer on this one.
Yeah. But yeah, long story short, Michael Giacchino has basically been involved in Star Trek ever since 2009 with J.J. Abrams and the Birth of the Kelvin timeline. So that was 2009, 2013 with Into Darkness, and 2016 with Beyond. He's also done supervising composer for 3 different episodes of Star Trek short treks. Those episodes are Ask Not, The Trouble with Edward, and Q&A. All of that was in 2019. And he was also the composer and director of Ephraim and Dot, which is a fun little animated episode of Star Trek short treks. And that was also in 2019. And he composed the theme music for the brand new Star Trek Prodigy, which is it's a fun series. Actually,
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, Miles and I discussed that the other night. It's a fun one. It's just getting off the ground, so I'm interested to see where that goes. But yeah, that's pretty much all of the Star Trek crossover with this.
I mean, that's a pretty decent crossover.
Yeah, it's all one guy, but it's still, I mean, Giacchino, so he got involved with Star Trek because he was a composer on Alias and Lost with J.J. Abrams. And I think he did Mission Impossible 3, which J.J. produced. And he's done a lot of Pixar movies. Like The Incredibles was him. I think he's a really great director. He's actually one of my favorite.
Didn't he also do Fringe?
He may have done
Yes,
Fringe. That's a bad
yeah.
robot thing, so it's very possible he may have done Fringe.
Such a good show.
To go that extra mile, they also used some of his stuff in 2009 for the Star Trek video game, Star Trek DAC, which I found out what DAC means, and it doesn't really seem to fit the theme of Star Trek. It means deathmatch, assault, and conquest.
Okay, but I was going to say like dick and cock or something, which doesn't seem very Star Trekky. So, but it wasn't quite that far gone.
No, it was a desperate attempt to get some sort of video game sales, even though the game itself is not good.
Oh, okay. I had never played it, but yeah.
I like Giacchino's. I like his work here because I think it's really fun and fits the movie very well.
Oh,
and of course, he utilizes the original Speed Racer theme song very, very well, I think. Because when they were making this movie, the Wachowskis actually purchased the rights to not only the theme song, but the sound effects that were used in the original series so that they could use those.
Nice.
Yeah, where
cool.
needed. So that's pretty fun.
Yeah.
So Speed Racer was filmed at Babelsberg Studios, the famous studio in Potsdam, Germany, where the majority of V for Vendetta had been filmed. We talked about that a lot during that episode. It's funny because most of this film is set on small sets or green screens. Majority of every scene is on a green screen. So it makes the location where they're filming it completely unrecognizable. So I'm like, well, why are they going to Germany to shoot this if they're just going to be on green screens the whole time? But it was largely economic. Warner Brothers received $13 million from Germany's then new federal film fund, which is the largest amount that had ever been granted by that organization at that point.
Wow.
So Germany basically paid them to come film there. That way they're hiring German crews. It's bringing a lot of money into the German economy, so it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, that's why a movie that has nothing remotely German about its look or locale was filmed in Germany.
Although, like, there's got to be a fun version that leans super hard on like German aesthetic. Go Speed Racer, go!
So
drive your car.
The production also marked the first time that the Wachowskis had ever shot on high definition video, which is a format that allowed them to have the entire foreground and background in focus, giving it a look that more closely resembled classic anime. It's called deep focus, but it's something that a lot of movies don't try to do, although Citizen Kane is famous for its deep focus work. So it's possible, but it's very difficult to light. But because of the way they're shooting this, they were able to, if you watch this movie, every single scene is fully in focus from foreground to background, which is very unusual and gives it a really unique look, even in like just what would in most movies be like a simple dialogue scene.
As someone who watches a lot of anime, I think it's one of the most striking things about this film. It's the closest I've seen to a live action representation of what an anime would look like as a live action representation. And it's so wild. It's unlike anything I think I've ever seen.
Once you start noticing that and the scene transitions and things like that in this movie, you can't stop noticing them.
Yeah,
I think the closest thing I've seen recently is, at least in the promotional materials for Netflix's I guess by the time this episode release, Cowboy Bebop show.
Yeah,
there looks to be an attempt to kind of capture that anime style and aesthetic. It's still nowhere near, I think, as visually striking and as I think more of a deep dive in its visual aesthetic as Speed Racer is, but it's the first time I've seen someone try to recapture what it feels like to be watching an animated program
cartoon,
as a live action experience.
And obviously this film's visual style is one of its biggest draws, its biggest talking points. And the Wachowskis' main cohorts in creating the movie's unique look were John Gaeta and cinematographer David Tattersall. Now, Tattersall, we haven't talked about him on this show yet. He's a British cinematographer whose previous credits included collaborations with directors such as Frank Darabont and George Lucas. He was actually the director of photography on the entire prequel trilogy, so he had worked with James McTeigue. But he was unfamiliar with Speed Racer, the cartoon, having grown up in England because it wasn't syndicated there. But he wanted to work on the project solely because of his respect for the Wachowskis. And
that's cool.
From their earliest conversations, the Wachowskis let Tattersall know that this was a film that was going to break new ground visually. And they wanted something that aesthetically ran like completely contrary to the dark and gritty look of the Matrix movies. They want a look that was that they described as super deep focus, super color saturated, and very smooth, clean, and sharp. A visual choice that not only was very different from their own previous work, but very different from what was prevalent in movies being released around this time. The Dark Knight, for instance, came out 2 months after Speed Racer, so that gives you a good idea of where most movies were aesthetically at this time.
Yeah, that's just that title alone paints a very clear picture.
Right. Early planning for the film's look referenced the work of anime directors such as Hayao Miyazaki, Katsuhiro Otomo, and Masamune Shiro, as well as the hyper-real work of photographers David LaChapelle and Jill Greenberg. And when I read that in my research, that was part of their visual style, especially David LaChapelle, who I was a big fan of back in like the early 2000s when he was at his heyday. If you are familiar with his work and the way that the colors just pop in his work, it is actually very obvious once you start watching this movie how big of an influence he was on it. It was also pretty clear very early on that Tattersall was going to have to work closely with John Gaeta and co-visual effects supervisor Dan Glass. I don't think we've mentioned Glass yet on this series. He's worked on a couple of these. He's been working as a visual effects supervisor with the Wachowskis since The Matrix Reloaded, and he'll actually continue to work with them on every Wachowski-directed project, including Sense8 and the upcoming Matrix Resurrections.
Okay, I thought I'd recognize the name, but
yeah, so he's been there. He's just he's kind of John Gaeta is kind of they're both credited as visual effects supervisor. John Gaeta gets all the press because he's the guy who did Bullet Time and things like that. But Dan Glass is a very important element in this as well. But Gaeta in particular on this film was instrumental in helping create the film's look, a technique that he called faux lensing, which refers to the way that in a lot of these shots in the film were created by capturing multiple photographic elements, manipulating and combining them to create an image that couldn't be created using traditional camera techniques. And the reasoning behind this approach came from their discussion of anime, like classic anime's influence on the project. As Gaeta explains, this is a quote from him. He says, anime tends to be very purposefully expressive. It has a lot more to do with the way the filmmaker wants you to feel than what's real. It's often not a literal attempt at drawing a simulation of reality, but more about enabling the emotional part of the scene to be visualized in some stylistic way. So if you've seen the movie, you know this, but they're clearly not going for realism here. They're going for a feeling. They're going for a vibe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
That's by far the critique of this movie that irritates me the most. Like everywhere, a lot of the ones that I've seen where they're like, the physics of this are ridiculous. And I'm like, okay, I get that's not the point here.
That's not what we're going for. Yes.
I'm not going to Speed Racer to watch Days of Thunder. I'm not trying to get even that's not even a realistic experience, but I'm not supposed to get a realistic experience from this movie. Right. I don't go into an adaptation of a already very cartoonish racing cartoon, expecting this to be some dark
realism.
Yeah.
I watched one of those, everything wrong with Speed Racer in 19 minutes or less or something. And I was watching it and I was like, most of the stuff was just like this.
Physics.
Why did they put a beehive in the slingshot instead of a bomb or something?
Yeah, because it's fun.
It's fucking Wacky Races the movie.
Right. Yeah. Here's Mario Kart the movie. It's like that is such a idiotic complaint. I gotta fundamentally misunderstand what they're going for. And I don't know how it's not super obvious because they're beating you over the head with it.
Well, even because even with it being so cartoony, I gotta say, at least it's consistent. They stay consistent pretty much throughout the entire time that you're watching, and I think that helps because it's like anything else that you establish, as hey, this is how it is in this world, be it dialogue or visuals or whatever it is, the physics of these cars. Hey, this is how it works here, and this is the story we're telling with that.
As long as the rule, if a movie creates its own rules and sticks to those rules, that's fine. It doesn't have to stick to the rules of other movies or even the real world. That's the way I see it.
Yeah.
So what they ended up doing is they would basically bend a scene visually in ways that just couldn't be done using a camera out in the real world. This is something that they had done in the Matrix films as well, especially like I mentioned before, that burly brawl scene. But even the Matrix had to have some sort of grounding in reality. Like the world of the Matrix still had to kind of look like the real world to be believable. But with the concept that they had behind this film, they had the ability to take it even further. And one of the main techniques that they used to achieve the film's look involved shooting in layers. So basically, they would have 4 units shooting at once. The Wachowskis were on the first unit. James McTeigue was their second unit director. And Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, who were the film's stunt coordinators. We talked about Chad Stahelski back on our Matrix episodes. He was the stunt coordinator there, as well as Keanu's stunt double. And of course, Stahelski and Leitch would go on to create the John Wick franchise later on. But they shot the third unit. So they were shooting a lot of the stunt stuff. And the fourth unit was all special effects stuff. So every scene was shot 4 times with these scenes layered against each other to give it a look that mimicked animation cells. So they would basically shoot a scene, and then they would shoot another scene and layer them over each other, which it's very noticeable in, say, when somebody's talking and there's a flashback, and instead of flashing back, it's the background behind them.
Yeah.
Like that, I love that so much.
It's a really great technique, I think, and really unique. And so Gata and Glass, they oversaw an in-house team called Exhaust that consisted of about 20 people who created 300 to 400 shots for the film. The rest of the film's effects were divided between a dozen different effects houses. And I noticed that I was watching the movie, and like when the credits came on, I just kept seeing like the names of these different effects houses, like one after another, more than I can recall ever seeing on a movie.
Yeah.
So they had Digital Domain creating the on-track racing scenes. Sony ImageWorks did the mountain race sequences. A company called BUF that's in Paris did most of the rally racing. Cosmopolis, which is the city, and Royalton's factory. And then other contributors included ILM and Evil Eye Pictures. Like they had a lot of big effects houses working on this nonstop. And these effects were created all over the world. This was 2007 or so when all this is being done, 2006, 2007. So technology was vastly different even then. It doesn't seem like that long ago, but even then it was vastly different than now. So basically they would have to email the files. They would work on it, email them in QuickTime format, and the Wachowskis would review each shot as it came in, give their feedback to the effects houses. The artists would work based on those notes. 3 hours later, they would do the same thing again, have another look at all the effects. Like it's a very bizarre process, but that's the way it's got to be done when you're working on something that's this heavy in effects.
Well, I mean, trying to get even, from a comic book perspective, trying to get something that looks consistent from page 1 to page 20 is tricky enough, let alone something like this, where it's not just one artist. You've got multiple houses with multiple artists. Yeah. That's crazy. It's crazy. Mm-hmm. And getting films made is damn near impossible. Yeah. So to have this seeming, I don't know that the average listener is going to really understand just what a monumental feat this is to get just this to look correct and consistent, let alone to get the whole thing done.
But at the same time, I think at that point in time, probably the only people that could have gotten that done, and probably the only people that could still only get it done, were the Wachowskis.
Yeah.
I mean, considering their trajectory at this point, where you've delivered something that stayed in the zeitgeist for half a decade, and then went on to be heavily involved with a massively popular Alan Moore adaptation.
Yeah,
you have such a goodwill both from audiences and studios, because all those things, no matter how you felt about them, generated a lot of money, and a lot of money based off their reputation for their special effects and their style.
Yeah,
that I think the only people who could have encouraged the spending required to make something like this work were the Wachowskis.
Yeah, I mean, the goodwill that they got just from the first Matrix movie alone is something that sustained them for
probably the rest of their life.
No, as we're going to see as we continue this series, their goodwill does run out with studios, largely as a result of the performance of this movie, honestly. But yeah, so
I adore this movie. So that
but it did not do well at the box office. I mean,
I am aware. I was by myself in that theater. It was just me in an afternoon screening on opening weekend.
Well, so it was released on May 9th, 2008. It opened at number 3 at the box office that weekend. And the reason, one I think of the main reasons it did not do well from a financial standpoint was because it was up against Iron Man. Iron Man had come out a week before. And then the following week, but the following week, it dropped down to number 4, the box office. So it, diminishing returns as is usually the case with any movie. And it went on to gross about $93 million worldwide, which is not great.
No.
And that's not just in America, worldwide, it brought in $93 million. And that's considered a major failure considering the film's budget of about $120 million. And that's before marketing and all the other expenses that come with releasing a movie.
Oh, God.
Critical reviews weren't kind either, with many saying that the filmmakers focused too much on the film's visual, too little on its characters and story. So it just all around was kind of getting pummeled by both critics and audiences alike.
Wow.
So that brings us to present day, Gary. It's funny because this film has been reevaluated a lot in its recent years since its release. It often appears on lists and articles about underrated or misunderstood films. But I am wondering what kind of reviews you were able to find on the internet, because I feel like as much as the opinion on this movie has changed over the years, I have a feeling there's still quite a lot of people who are not fans.
Yeah, even most recently, there are people still going back to revisit Speed Racer and then are racing to their keyboards.
There it is.
And letting the world
Got
know
him!
that somebody needs a nap. Let's see. We got Henry here who says, I don't know why this is hailed as some hidden gem or underappreciated masterpiece. It's obnoxious and annoying, and it looks awful.
Little known that's actually Henry Rollins writing that. He's still a little salty about not getting that part.
Parker from April of 2021 says Speed Racer is why Matthew Fox quit acting.
Quit acting?
I just love that review.
When did Matthew Fox quit acting?
He doesn't quit acting.
These are all half-star reviews, by the way, and it's important to say that because this is my Todd's half-star review of the day. My person who thinks like Todd gives a half-star review.
Oh, give it to me. Come on.
This phenomenal movie, filled with astonishing acting and impressive visual effects, invites the viewer on a journey of self-discovery. The shallow message that the film first appears to have very quickly transforms into a surreal neo-Napoleonic impressionism classic adventure. The avant-garde elements present in this movie will entice any viewer to experience the Burgundy finest cinema. Every single shot and scene is perfectly crafted. I can barely tell it was CGI. The classical French colors are present in every frame. All of this movie could be painted and hanged in the finest museums of Europe. The appropriate performance by Emil Hirsch as Speed Racer, supported by one of Natalie Portman's best performances ever as Trixie. That is wrong. I was
Natalie
like, this person's, you know what?
Natalie Portman's so good in this that she makes herself look like Christina Ricci. The transformative
that review is going. And I was asking myself, how did this person give it a half star? But I think we answered it right there. So
I think they're being maybe they're being sarcastic.
I think they're being 100% sarcastic. Yeah, making fun of people that like the movie.
So 2 thoughts on what on you thinking that person sounds like me. First of all, I'm incredibly flattered because that person seems to at least be very articulate.
Well, let me
secondly, how dare you?
well, now that we've said that, I think Miles is right, because as I'm like scrolling through it, I only read the first half before, but it says, because this is the other part, the appropriate performance by Emil Hirsch as Speed Racer, supported by one of Natalie Portman's best performances ever as Trixie, matching only her mastery of the Star Wars prequels, will bring the viewer into the story like nothing I've ever seen before. Alexander Skarsgård as Speed Racer's brother is short of sublime. Wachowski's perfectly crafted script shows why they deserve the Oscars. The long German cinematic experience is clearly visible here. an obligatory movie to any who consider themselves living humans.
Like, I can't even be mad at the effort that went into that. Like, it's it's a genuinely funny review.
That's a great review.
Nice.
Dreamer says, half star, the Wachowskis overdosed on red pills, gave birth to this fucking car wreck, which is a metaphor for their entire career after the first Matrix. 135 minutes of pure agony and suffering, the ugliest looking film I've ever seen. I'd rather be tied to a chair with my eyes wide open, forced to watch the fucking cat in the fucking hat back to back, rather than endure another goddamn minute of this abortion.
Wow. Jeez.
All right.
Wow.
Ben says, half star, Trump decided to run for president after watching Speed Racer.
I don't even know what that means, but it kills me.
Brayden says, this is a truly harrowing film. I swear to Christ that I had ingested no illicit substances on the evening that I watched this, yet I swear that it got to a certain point in this acid-soaked nightmare where I was certain that I had been watching this mess for 2 hours already, and surely we were approaching the climax, only to find out that there were another 2 big races to endure. Time hasn't been the same for me since. I detest this film and what it did to me. I was shitting Skittles for 3 weeks after exposure to this neon garbage color palette. Wachowskis, more like Wachowskis. Wachowskis.
Okay.
Okay.
I've said to my friends since that I know there are technically worse films that have been made than Speed Racer. However, it just so happens to be the film that I have enjoyed the least out of any movie that I've ever bothered to watch in my life.
Wow.
And
complaining about the number of races in a film called Speed Racer seems a little bit odd.
I think he was complaining more about the pacing. He was saying he felt like the movie should be over by now, and there's still 2 more races to go.
Okay.
So you touched on something that became part of the, I would say, running joke in criticism at the time, where everyone was talking about, oh, you have to be on drugs. You have to be on drugs to watch Speed Racer. That was the joke everyone always made when they saw the trailer or when they were talking about discourse about the film. And I remember reading, I want to say it was like Ain't It Cool News at the time, because that's where we were in culture at the time.
Yeah, it's 2008, yeah.
And the relatively positive review that was given, I remember specifically was kind of pushed back against that, saying, you don't need to take drugs to enjoy Speed Racer. Watching Speed Racer is like being on drugs in the best way.
Yeah.
And
with that said, you can take drugs and enjoy Speed Racer.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Like you do you. Not heroin or anything like that, though.
Our final review comes from Michelle, who did step it up and give 1 star to this
One
movie.
whole star.
One whole star. And she says, this movie is like a love letter to the Speed Racer anime. If that love letter was written by a psychopathic murderer to the dismembered victim. Speaking of victims, I feel like one after trying to choke down this abomination. As a lifelong fan of the franchise, I still get chills when I hear the theme music and the sound of the Mach 5 gunning its engine. So I'm doubly annoyed that Hollywood got a hold of another one of my childhood favorites and performed this colostomy of a movie. How this film was ever allowed to be seen publicly simply mystifies me. Wachowski sisters, you have entertained me with your other creations, but you will answer for this crime.
That sounds like a threat.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Sounds like a threat.
It does sound like a threat. It also sounds like someone had not seen any of the follow-up animation for Speed Racer, because they're also very bad.
Like the remake.
There was the New Adventures. There was a cartoon that was released in anticipation of this one, which was fucking awful.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I never ever like jump on board of the you ruined my childhood train. I think
that's stupid. Your childhood is still there.
Yeah. I hate that criticism to basically toss away this thing, or making any sort of nuanced conversation about it, like, oh well, they ruined my childhood, or my childhood's forever tainted by this monstrous attempt to make a Hollywood film. It's the laziest kind of thing you can say about a movie.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm curious then, while we're talking about people who need a nap, in the past we have discussed this film. Actually, we did an episode on it on our old podcast years ago. I think our buddy Zach Daigle sat in on that. I don't remember, but anyway, what I do distinctly remember is that Gary was not a fan of this movie at all at that time. But over the years, this has happened where we've discussed films and opinions have changed, or at least altered a little bit. So I am curious, Gary, before we get going on any more discussion on this, where you fell on this movie after watching it this time.
So in the what's the word? The oeuvre. I'm not fancy like you guys. The Wachowskis oeuvre. Their duvet.
Filmography works too.
Yeah,
you can
filmography. I actually have to say that I enjoyed this movie a lot more this time. I still think the colors gross me out at certain points. Like, it's just a lot. Like, I think some of it it does
it's a lot
not
of visual
make any,
stimulation.
Yeah, it doesn't make any fucking sense to me, but I got it. And I think this movie, I would actually say I think this movie has the most heart out of any movie they've made.
I agree. I mean, that's been one of your criticisms towards them, is that people often feel robotic in their movies, which is not untrue. But like the especially mom and pops, like they're just they are kind of the heart. I mean, John Goodman's the heart of this movie to me.
They cast those roles superbly. I mean, Susan Sarandon and John Goodman.
Susan Sarandon and John Goodman are so perfect in those roles that it's like you've done half the work just by hiring them.
It's fucking insane, but there's been a moment that I've been sitting there and John Goodman and Susan Sarandon are a big part of it, especially John Goodman. And just because like Susan Sarandon's like kind of absent, it feels like, during a lot of the movie.
Yeah, I do wish she was in it a little bit more, but yes.
But there were moments I've been thinking about this movie where I'm like, this is my favorite Wachowskis movie, maybe because it just feels better to watch it. I still don't think they have a movie that I'm just like dying to watch over and over again. I don't think that this,
even the original Matrix does,
no, like I still like I like the Matrix. I appreciate what the Matrix is, but here's the thing I have with them is that that phone interview I mentioned earlier too that I had, there was another part to it where they talk about the technology and doing what they can do in the editing, and like nobody's ever touched this or done that. And the last part of that interview, Lana goes on to say, here's a quote actually. And then we started talking about cubism and the way it offers this construction of art based on the imagination of perspective. We could make the first cubist film because we could have the back of someone's head and the front of their face at the same time. But we knew in just the way that Picasso was hunted and rocks were hurled at him when he first unveiled Guernica. He was literally hounded by a mob out of the city. We knew that adults cannot accept challenges to their conventional aesthetic, the aesthetic that they're bonded to. If you assault that aesthetic, they will rage in this really primitive way. So we thought maybe we can make it for kids because kids are more open aesthetically than adults are. So it all like makes sense, but something clicked with me there where I started to get this impression, and even in the DeVry interview I was watching, it's like they're really obsessed with making art. Like they're really obsessed with being artists, which is fine, if that's your thing. But I don't think that they're ever going to have like also a completely entertaining movie for me. Like,
well, I think I see where you're coming from. I don't necessarily agree. I do think that they like to push back against expectations a lot. I think they like to push the envelope a lot as far as what is accepted in a movie. And I think that goes back all the way to Bound, but especially with The Matrix. And I think The Matrix is incredibly entertaining beginning to end. We talked about that ad nauseum during that episode, but it's one of the most influential films of the last 30 years. And this movie I find to be very entertaining beginning to end. But I mean, I kind of understand when people do push back on it because it is an assault on the senses in a way that movies usually are not. And that can make some people uncomfortable.
And it's good to know. I mean, I think a lot of art is a lot about it is intent. We say that a lot too. Like, what are you trying to do? Did they succeed in what they set out to do? And they did, I think. So I try to give credit for that where it's due. Like, not everybody's trying to make everything for everybody. And they straight out said in that interview I just mentioned that they went for the kids because they're like, you guys are going to be okay. And it's kind of how I felt like when I first started watching it again this time, where I was like, oh, wow, they watched, you ever see that cartoon Flapjack or whatever it is?
Yeah.
It felt like I was like, somebody just watched Flapjack and they're like, do 2 hours of this. And I was like, I've enjoyed that cartoon a little bit from here and there, but like in 15-minute increments.
Right.
It was like, now we got like 2.5 hours of just like insanity. And which is cool. I mean, I like I said, I don't think necessarily it was made for me. So that's even okay. I can appreciate what they're doing. And like I said, it has heart. Like you mentioned Iron Man, and I had forgotten that Iron Man came out during the same time, but I should have remembered that because I'm a nerd. But the one that I thought of was The Dark Knight.
Yeah. And
The Dark Knight came out around this time, and you would say that they're two totally different movies, and made two different ways, like completely dark, brooding movie versus this movie with what it is. But they both also, like, what's amazing about them is they both really reflect exactly what the story is at the heart of the movie too, which I thought was really interesting. I thought like Dark Knight is obviously the Dark Knight, and this movie is, at the end of the day, it's still about, I think Film Crit Hulk had a review about it, talking about like a lot of movies are about the hero overcomes the odds or something, you know, like nobody believes he could do it, then he does it and pushes through. But in Speed Racer, it's all about his family and his friends that do believe him the whole time, and then still at the end he proves them right. And it was just like, yeah, Speed Racer is overly bright and flashy, but it also is that kind of story, I guess.
Right, exactly. That's the story they're trying to tell. I mean, this is, Speed Racer really is kind of the definition of like what is considered a cult film. You know, it's a movie that did not do well at the box office, a movie that critics thought was, they called it garish, they called it style over substance, but then in the, what's it been, 13 years since it came out, it's been reappraised by audiences and critics and Gary Horns the world over. and that's nothing new. I mean, films like Donnie Darko, Fight Club, those are considered like classics now, but they were both critical and commercial failures at the time. Like, this is nothing new or nothing unique to this film, but you know, Speed Racer is admittedly excessive. It is, for one, it's long. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes long, which for a movie that's aimed at kids is too long. It should really be 45 minutes shorter to truly be a kids movie, because kids don't have that much of an attention span.
That's a good
point.
But
that being said, I don't think there's a lot that I would cut from the film. I mean, the races could be shorter, but the races are sort of part of the point of the film,
and they each have their own identity too. So
yeah, they're all fun. I think you could cut out pretty much everything with Sprittle and Chim Chim, and I'd be okay with that because they kind of get on my nerves. But that's not so much that it would really make that big of a difference. Although I do think the cutting between them and Royalton's big speech about stock prices and shit is very jarring, and I think that's the biggest flaw in the movie from a filmmaking standpoint to me. Is, you know, the scene where Royalton is giving his big villain speech to Speed about his intentions, and then they cut with this zany chase on a golf cart with Sprittle and the monkey. It just feels, every time they cut back and forth, I'm like, what? This you get like whiplash, you know. It's very strange. But
I mean, this film is absolutely the cinematic equivalent of giving a bunch of unsupervised 11-year-olds as much soda as they could have.
yeah.
It is. I think the best example of that, is Sprittle and Chim Chim playing the solo from Freebird.
Right. It's just very strange, a very strange choice. But, and this is also, for a family film, it's pretty complicated plot wise. Like, all of the talk of corrupt corporate politics and rigged races would probably go over the head of a lot of kids in the audience.
Somebody did say somewhere that were like the speech you're talking about was like, if you thought that the what's the guy from the Matrix, the fucking guy in the room,
the architect,
yeah, they were like, if you thought this is for people who thought the architect speech wasn't boring and banal enough.
I mean, the thing is, like, the subject of his speech, I guess, could be seen that way, but Roger Allam gives such a great mustache twirling villain performance. I think he's really great in it. And also all of that stuff, like the rigged races, the corporate politics, that's the stuff that's prevalent in the original TV series. Like, this is not an invention that the Wachowskis made. So the question is then, why did it fail at the box office? It, for one, it had stiff competition. I do think it was a bit ahead of its time in the way that it was made. I don't know when it would be made for, but it certainly wasn't 2008. I mean, this was a property. Speed Racer, people know what Speed Racer is, but it wasn't exactly at its height of popularity in the mid 2000s. But more than anything, I think it just went against the grain for what audiences expected at the time. I mean, like we've mentioned it a couple of times, that this was released just a couple of months before The Dark Knight, a film that acted as sort of the pinnacle for gritty realism in filmmaking. Audiences were looking for these types of movies. Movies, even superhero movies, were very cynical at the time. Were very trying to be gritty and trying to be edgy. Like, that's what movies were trying to do in the mid 2000s. And then here comes Speed Racer with bright colors and a fairly old-fashioned story of good guys versus bad guys. And I think a lot of audiences might have thought that was childish or naive when they saw the trailer. I think that's a big part of it. But to me, that the optimistic tone of the movie, this is kind of going into what Gary was saying about it. I think that's one of its charms. I think that's what they're going for, and I think they nailed it. And I think that's part of what makes the movie fun, because this is a movie that it announces what it is from the very first frame. And by the first frame, I mean before we see a character or a title, you get this kaleidoscope of color that accompanies the WB logo, and it tells you that you're in for something very big and very loud and very bright and very unlike anything that we've seen before. And very different even from what we expect from Wachowski movie, which, in the Matrix movies were muted color and grittiness, and this is incredibly different. And it's very different in tone, because this is, you say it's got a lot of heart. It's a very sincere movie. And I think sincerity to a lot of audiences comes across as corny.
I think so, but I still feel like even critics like tried to read a lot into this, which, I mean, I'm sure it's there because it's the Wachowskis. There's like parts of it, but what I think a big part of this movie is that I think they were obsessed of aesthetically what they could do, like what were the possibilities of what they could achieve here.
Sure.
I throw back to these interviews constantly, but they don't do many. So Lana talks a lot about that. She used to get frustrated with like movie critics never mentioned aesthetics. Like, that was never a part of the subject, but that was like one of the first things that she noticed. She mentioned in the DeVry interview, like it's pretty fantastic actually. She mentions a month apart, Moonrise Kingdom and Snow White and the Huntsman came out, and she was like, literally, these are the same two movies. Like, they have exactly the same story. Like, she lays it out in the interview, like exactly like plot point by plot point. Like, this is exactly, here's the environment they're in. This is what happened. And these two movies are the exact same movie, but nobody ever said that, because just the aesthetics mattered so much that nobody pieced it together. She was like, watch Apocalypse Now and watch Conan the Barbarian. She was like, those two movies are literally the same movie. Like, she's like, at least the arc of the story is exactly the same. And she's like, but they're just aesthetically, you don't ever connect it. And so she's got like this big obsession. So she you can tell she's like really like down to I guess where I'm going is another point she made is one of her favorite moments, like a peak moment in cinema for her. She mentions was 2001, that she saw 2001. It was the first movie she ever saw that she got like pissed off at, because she like saw it and then she couldn't wrap her brain around what is this thing at the end that shows up and blah, blah, blah. And she was talking to her dad and she's like, what is happening there? Like, I don't understand it. He's like, well, I think it's like the image of God, or I think that's what they're going for or something. And then she said she made her dad take her back to see it again. And then she went into it looking at like, okay, this is God. And then she's like, okay, but what else is going on here? So she starts looking at it more. So she just becomes obsessed with like multiple meanings in a movie, and like just how you can make a movie that you're not going to grasp the first time you see it. It requires multiple viewings, or like a piece of literature that requires multiple readings. Anyway, I say all of that to say they're very obsessed with the art side of it. Again, is going back to what I originally said. And so I think that even they knew with Speed Racer, they're just some lucky motherfuckers. They're like really artsy filmmakers that somehow,
well, they're really artsy
into like they got mega millions to make movies.
Well, they're really artistic filmmakers who also, they have obsessions with things like philosophy, like these high-minded ideas, but they also like cartoons and comic books and things that are considered more lowbrow. And they have this blending of the two, especially in the Matrix movies and this. Now, it goes a little, well, even later on, like Jupiter Ascending is very pulp, but I think that's what it is that but that doesn't always connect with audiences, I think, because when you have multiple influences like that coming in at where they're merging, it doesn't always strike audiences the way that they might want to.
And I feel so bad for them, because it really feels like they knew eventually somebody was going to catch on.
Yeah.
Somebody's like,
they're like, let's get away with
not
it
getting money
we can.
Well, what's interesting, so to go back to what you were saying about how they're obsessed with cartoons and comic books and stuff like that. I think what's interesting about them is they're not upset. They're obsessed with taking something seriously. They take Speed Racer seriously, but to them, taking something seriously is not about making it grounded or realistic. And that's usually what people assume when you want to take something seriously. It's a grounded, realistic representation. Whereas they show you what they see as the cartoon in its best form. Sure. The writing for these characters is cartoon writing, but it's not cartoon writing in a this is bad way. It's
not looking down on it.
No, it's like we are these actors are performing the roles of cartoons as live action people.
Yeah.
But that's not a bad thing. I think it's an interesting from a performance perspective, because everyone has to be very aware of their movements at all times. And I love that.
Well, what you're saying there too, Miles, is just, I think one of the things that changed during this viewing of Speed Racer for me was me. I don't know. I found it really hard, as much as I would love to come back in battling, and I can make jokes and stuff, but like watching it this time, I found it really hard, given the state of the world today, and sometimes mentally where I go, like, I'm just like, I'm watching this movie and I'm like, I can't hate something this wholesome. Like, I can't. Like,
right.
That's the thing.
It's
like
so fucking sweet.
that goes back to me, like where I mentioned its sincerity, because that's something that when I initially saw this in 2008, I was wowed by the visuals.
Me too.
And I've seen it probably, I don't know, I've probably seen it half a dozen times at this point. And the last couple of times is only when I've realized like where that sincerity and that optimism and that wholesomeness has really kind of jumped out at me. Because like for you mentioned this before, one of you guys did, where I think Gary, you were quoting the Film Crit Hulk article where there's not like there's a villain in Royalton and stuff, but really this is not like a hero's journey. This is not Apocalypse Now. This is not a guy having to make this big journey to become who he needs to be. Speed is fully formed as a great racer at the beginning of the movie, but you get some stuff in flashbacks and stuff, but for really what the movie's about is like for the racer family, winning is important. Racing is important, because he even says like you race to win, but it's not if it's at the expense of integrity. and sportsmanship. That's more important to these characters because they're just like the Racer family. They're just good people. And sometimes audiences have a hard time accepting characters who are just good, sincere people. Because I do think that sincerity flows over into the relationship between family members, because this is a family that is not dysfunctional. They all love each other. I mean, there's a little bit of squabbling, but they stick together. And that's a little cheesy to people, but I don't see anything wrong with that, with it being a little bit cheesy.
I will say this. I had a big problem with Pop having the interview with what's his face, Royalton or whatever, like just where he's like, maybe this is a Wachowski's parenting issue, but he was just like in there, just like, I've seen men like you, and I know what you do, and everything about this leaves a bad taste in my mouth, and yada, yada, yada. But if whatever Speed wants to do, we'll do it. If he wants to sign up, I'm like, no, Pop, fucking be a dad.
It's so funny because it mirrors later on in the movie where he refuses to let Speed join the rally race.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Well, and on a side note, between how much talk there is about family combined with the car racing and the disregard for physics, this feels like it could be a part of the Fast and Furious franchise at times.
Yeah, it absolutely. Well, especially what the Fast and Furious franchise becomes.
Right. Yeah. As I was watching this, I was like, they're saying family more than Vin Diesel does in the later
I
Fast
swear
and
to God,
Furious movies.
if you'd have gave me like Speed Racer, like sitting up at the starting line at one point and like the end of Tokyo Drift, like Vin Diesel just like pulls up next to him.
Vin Diesel as Racer X.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I think what I appreciate about this film is that it is so uncynical, because I don't think, especially compared to superhero films, I feel like we were deconstructing the genre before the genre ever fully formed. We had Dark Knight and Watchmen before the MCU was ever formed. You know? So I felt like we already gotten that dark, gritty, realistic, cynical superhero stuff without ever getting the whimsy and the kind of wonder that genre represents. And the same with these cartoons. And I think the Wachowskis tap into something with this film where, like you said, it's wholesome, it's sweet, but there is a general sense of wonder about the world. Their whole thing, this like as you put it, a kaleidoscopic image on the screen, is all about looking at something and seeing beauty, whether it be through racing or your family or just having to do the right thing. There is beauty in everything that they do here. And I think that's so interesting. And I can definitely see from where Gary's coming from with the state of things as they are now, seeing a movie that just doesn't give a shit about anything but being pure is such a whiplash moment now.
Well, the thing is, when you start talking about the movie as part of the overall Wachowski filmography, I was thinking about this as I was watching it and afterwards, as I was thinking about this episode. Like, we've talked a lot about the themes of the Wachowskis movies, themes of identity, etc. And where I think this really fits in, talking from that point of view, is that it is much like The Matrix and V for Vendetta. Speed Racer is essentially, they are all about revolutions against like the man, for lack of a better term.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like in the Matrix, you've got Neo fighting against the machines, not necessarily because the reality inside the machines is bad, because people inside the Matrix have it better off than people outside the Matrix, honestly, but because it's a lie, it's false. You know, the same goes for V for Vendetta. Like the North Fire Party took over. They came into power because of a disaster, and that disaster was a lie. Not that it didn't happen, but because they created it. You know, this virus is something they created. So yes, it's another falsity that brought the man into power. So in Speed Racer society, giant corporations seem to kind of rule everything, but nobody is like noticeably oppressed. Like Mom and Pop Racer and their family, they seem to be living a good suburban life. You see her out there in her lounge chair and he's cutting the grass, you know, typical suburban life. But these big corporations, they're fixing races. They're creating another falsity, another lie by fixing races. And racing is the only thing that Speed cares about, you know, and to find out that it is all based on a lie is kind of a big deal. So the rest of the movie is him fighting against that, you know. It's really like in The Matrix and in V for Vendetta, the concealing of the truth. It's that's really what the protagonists are fighting against is the lie, this concealing of the truth.
It's because they write movies like with Rage Against the Machine playing in the background, and
yes,
they're just like they
telling everyone to wake up. Yeah.
And the thing with like V for Vendetta was it was like government overreach and like government, you know, that sort of thing. And this is about corporate overreach or like corporate power. The difference between the two usually is it feels like, from my limited knowledge, that like sometimes corporate overreach is just like you can still do your thing, just to use another racing term, stay in your lane and don't try to like challenge us.
That's the thing. These are protagonists who are challenging. They're challenging the status quo. Like Neo refuses to accept a world ruled by machines, even though before he was awakened from the Matrix, he had no idea. V and Evie refuse to live in this police state that the Norse Fire Party has created. And Speed refuses to accept that this is just how the racing world is, that these are just fixed races that are designed to inflate the price of oil. Like he refuses to believe that. He believes that racing, he has more integrity than that. And he believes that it means more. And I love that. I love that that even with a quote unquote kids movie, the Wachowskis are still like, this is a very anti-corporation, anti-capitalism screed.
100%
from the Wachowskis. Once you start digging into it, ironically funded by a giant corporation in Warner Brothers, but you know, you got to do what you got to do, I guess, to get your message out there. But
yeah, I mean, it's tough. Like things get labeled all the time. I mean, I think the main point with Speed's idea is that like it is important to him to race. Like that's what he lives for, and winning is important, but only if it's on a level playing field that he wins.
Only if it's done fairly.
Yeah, like
exactly.
It's better to know that I'm actually the best at this.
Yes,
like
exactly.
It's that everybody had the same chance and I still won. Like I want to be the best, like the actual best at this, not like a faux best at this.
Yeah. And I've even seen some analysis of this that dig into it from, you know, much like we did with the Matrix, from the Wachowskis' identity, the fluidity of identity point of view, that we've talked about in especially the Matrix movies, but a little bit in V for Vendetta as well. But from the point of view of the Rex Racer character, or the Racer X character, because he is someone who literally changes who they are, changes their identity, has to face the world as a different person, and does it, you know, even with the aid of surgery and whatnot. So you can dig into this stuff really far if you want.
That motherfucker got plastic surgery and put on a mask.
Yeah,
just in case.
double identity change. So,
and plus, I don't know, by the way, why you would get plastic surgery and go from a Porter to like you need Matthew Fox's nose. No offense, but I mean, of all parts of Matthew Fox, like, you would at least kept the same, like, not your big ass honker.
Another thing I thought was interesting when you were bringing up the history, that a lot of people associated with music were attached, because the way this film is kind of initially set up reminds me of a music bio. Like we see Racer or Speed, you know, reflecting on his life in the locker room, much in the way
like
that
Dewey Cox.
Or
he's got to think about his whole life before he goes out.
Johnny Cash and Folsom Prison at the beginning.
I was about to say the other day I went on a fucking whole trip down memory lane, and I watched literally back to back. I watched Walk the Line, I watched Ray, and then I watched I'd never seen it before, but I watched what's the Hank Williams one? I just forgot the name of it, with the one with Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I watched that one. But yeah, they just love like a fucking sitting in a lonely room and thinking about the past kind of thing.
Yeah, and I never put that together, even though when I was watching this, I was like, this looks like fucking Walk the Line.
Yeah, I mean, Dewey Cox like makes fun of it, but when you go back and watch those actual movies, you're like, no, this is like they straight up did this.
And I love that you can dig into all of this stuff with this movie if you want to, because the Wachowskis are very intelligent. So there's a chance that a lot of this stuff was definitely on their minds. But what I love about this movie, I mean, that stuff's fun to think about and talk about. And I love the sincerity of the movie. I love its heart. And I love how fun it is. And essentially, like, that is what I get out of this movie, is how it captures what it feels like to watch anime. You know, like, this is a film that's totally unconcerned with reality. It hasn't been like focus group to death. Like, this is what audience want to see. This is the Wachowskis going, this is the movie we want to make, and we're going to make it regardless, even if audiences don't know they want to see this yet, and the audiences weren't ready for it. It took them a decade before people really started loving this movie. It's a movie it's got cars doing car fu against each other. It's got John Goodman fighting ninjas or nanjas. And it's got
also as a strong man. Like they give you that information late. And I'm like, yep. I want this backstory. I want to see John Goodman wrestling.
This is a movie that has an evil business meeting on a truck filled with piranhas.
It's like amazing.
It doesn't have these things because Warner Brothers did a focus group and found out that this is what audiences wanted it. It has these things because the Wachowskis thought they were going to be fucking cool, you know, and they are. Like, they're just fun. They're just throwing things in there that are fun. Earlier you mentioned the car that throws the honeycomb. It's just fun, you know.
The first time I watched this movie, like, and still to this day, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this movie doesn't make me want to throw up at points, but so do roller coasters sometimes, and they're still fun,
right?
And so it's that's just part of it, you know. Like, I this time watching it, knowing the Wachowskis, like, going through the series, I had more of an appreciation for the fact that they're like, do I think they lean a little bit into wanting to be artists too much, more than focusing on the human side of the stories? Most of the time, yes. This time, they might have found their best, like, balance of it. I do appreciate pushing the envelope, but, like, I see, you know, like, we've seen. I'll throw to the interview one more time, and I swear to God I won't do it anymore. But one of the things Lana said specifically was the depiction of Mary. Like, if you're thinking of Jesus and like Mary has looked the same for hundreds of years in every depiction. Like, what if you tried to switch up Mary? Like, there was just like this, it did make me think, like, okay, yeah, like, we've seen movies look the same way. Like, what if there's a different way to do this? Like, we mentioned the walk the line thing, but that's legit. Like, I mean, there is Speed sitting in the room at the beginning doing that thing, the Dewey Cox thing or whatever. But the real shit happens when Speed's on the track and the shit's just like flowing through his brain all at the same time. And it's like popping up on screen. And he's like racing his ghost brother on the track while he's remembering being a kid at the same time. Just like popping in and out, like, around his head.
Never stop moving.
Yeah. And it's just like, movie. And that is more. Well, God help me. I know that's how my brain works half the time.
So, Todd, I don't know what your history. Well, before we wrap it up, I'm curious what was your history on this? Because I don't know if we ever talked about it before, or what you thought about it prior to this.
I think, you know, as much as I love the superhero movies that came out around this time, Iron Man, Dark Knight, you know, arguably some of the best comic book movies made to date. I think I fell victim to them in watching this and expecting something in the same vein. So when I first saw this, I was kind of like, all right, I get it. It's not for me, but all right, whatever. But going into this now for the viewing for this episode, I really was able to just kind of put all of that aside and watch this in and of itself. And I actually had a blast. It is a lot of fun. And if you can, you know, and I guess that's a benefit of time, you know, once this thing, you know, gets out of whatever is playing at the multiplex at the time, and you're able to view it in and of itself apart from everything else, that's where I think all this stuff sort of blossoms. And, you know, we start to see the layers of, yes, this top layer, this, you know, superficial layer is super colorful, super loud, very cartoony, but as you start to peel that away, you start to see some of the things that characters were doing that were very subtle. I was watching,
like an ogre.
yeah, exactly, just like an ogre. But I was watching, and I don't know why this stuck out to me, but I was watching Emil Hirsch walking around the breakfast table in that scene early on, and noticing his slow, deliberate movements, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting choice, for someone named Speed, who has gone very fast this whole life. And I started to try to unravel that in my head, and seeing that we talked a little bit about the time period that this came out in. And I think it did fall victim to the movies of this time, but looking at it, I don't think that started here. I think it started in the 80s. It started in the 80s with Tim Burton's Batman, and it was a progression from there, even including the Joel Schumacher stuff, which of the comic book stuff at the time, if Joel Schumacher's Batman movies had come out at the same time as this, that would be a perfect back-to-back viewing. They're super colorful, very cartoony.
Honestly, I'm now picturing Joel Schumacher's version of Speed Racer, and I think I would really enjoy that.
I'm now picturing that Joel Schumacher went into Batman and Robin and was like, oh, it's getting a little dark for me. The part of the stuff I liked about Batman was the fun too.
Yeah.
And
I just want to see
trying to hit the brakes a little bit.
I just want to see a Racer X with nipples on his outside of his
that's
suit.
really at the end of the day. Todd, you touched on something really quick that's worth saying too, is that Emil Hirsch doesn't get enough credit as an actor. Like, that guy's a fucking phenomenal actor.
Yeah. He got nominated for an Oscar a few years after this, but
all right, well, fuck me, I guess. But,
but at the time for Into the Wild.
Okay, I was gonna say
that's right. Yeah, Into the Wild. But I mean, even in The Girl Next Door, which I own, like, I still stand by as like a legitimately good movie, especially at the death of raunchy sex comedies. Or whatever.
Lords of Dogtown's really good. Really good movie.
Yeah.
Emil Hirsch is really great at whatever role you fit him into.
I think that he nails that sincere tone that the Wachowskis are going for with that character. And
that's it. He always
it's a shame that the movie didn't do well, because he actually fired his agent the Monday after this movie came out. Which is a shame, because I hope that now he can look back at it and see how good it is, and how much people really enjoy it now. So this is the part we normally do this on towards the end of the episode, and this was for such a unique film, a movie that even almost a decade and a half later, nothing has come out that looks remotely or seems remotely like this movie, including the further movies by the Wachowskis. So in our further viewing segment, it's going to be an interesting one to try to pair up, because I'm curious what you guys would pick if you were doing a double feature with Speed Racer.
Scott Pilgrim.
Well, that's a pretty fucking good idea, Don.
That's the one.
And the reason I said it like that is because I assumed all of us were going to say it at the same time.
I got a different one, but that's
I would say I was definitely thinking of Scott Pilgrim, just because I hesitate to say did it better or anything, but I feel like Scott Pilgrim, this movie helped Scott Pilgrim be able to exist.
This movie walked so that Scott Pilgrim could run. Is what
there you go. Exactly. It's like, I feel like I would watch Scott Pilgrim more often than this movie, but Scott Pilgrim wouldn't exist without it.
But also, Scott Pilgrim was not successful at the box office. I think it's
normal audiences weren't ready. I just think Scott Pilgrim gets character and the craziness, all of it balanced perfectly. And this one I still argue with, but I don't hate this movie anymore. You can go back to our old show. I definitely hated it then. I don't hate this movie anymore. I think this movie's fine. In fact, again, I think it might be my favorite Wachowskis movie so far.
Nice. So, do you know anything you would pair with this, Miles?
Yes.
Yeah.
To double feature, this is not a film that you guys have seen. I can almost guarantee.
You don't know me in my life, Miles.
That's true. Is it Talladega Nights? Miles, is it Talladega Nights?
As you guys have told me many times, you guys aren't big into anime. Okay. And there was an anime film from 2009 called Redline that it's as if they looked at Speed Racer and said, That's adorable.
But this is fully animated.
Yes, it's fully animated. It's one of the first. One of the only fully hand-drawn animation films that's come out in the last 20 years. It's over 100,000 frames of hand-drawn animation. Nice. It takes Speed Racer, the 2008 film, and inject it with heavy metal, and that's the movie.
All right, this sounds great.
As in the magazine/movie anthology Heavy Metal, like that is this film.
It's called Redline.
It's called Redline.
Okay. I'm adding this to my watch list.
And I think you can still watch it on Tubi. I'm pretty sure it's free to stream. It's just a wild, it has a very specific style, just like this. I think just like this film, it is completely unpretentious and it builds its own world in a way that a film like The Fifth Element builds its sci-fi world, where like you kind of want more of it, but you're pretty satisfied that you got the world building down. It's also just a ride.
Wow. Nice. That sounds great.
If I could just say, like, if you want to see the ultimate evolution of this, I recommend Fast 6 or 7. Those are
he says while wearing a Vin Diesel t-shirt.
I do. I wear a Vin those are the ultimate. Or if you'd like to experience more of the big box office and vomiting and less of everything else, Michael Bay has a Transformer series you might enjoy.
So I just looked up that movie that you were talking about, Miles, and it is directed by Takeshi Koike.
Yes.
Nice. Very cool. I think we talked about him.
We talked about Koike
on the fucking Animatrix.
Correct.
That's right.
Yes, he did world record on the Animatrix. So we talked about him on that. Yes, which is one of my favorite segments of that movie. So go back and listen to our.
You will love that movie.
Okay, I'm really excited to watch it.
I think he also did like Afro Samurai, or like maybe the
pilot, I think, or
the pilot of Afro Samurai.
Yes. He's done some great stuff. This is kind of his actual, like, his one vision. He did a short film that it's kind of a prequel to this universe that he did years before Redline came out. It took them like 7 years to make Redline, and like Speed Racer, didn't do that great. They didn't market it right. I don't know what happened, but it's we did it for our anime this past May on The More You Nerd, and it just blew us away.
Wow. Well, I'm gonna watch.
He did
that
the
for
sequel
sure.
to Vampire Hunter D too, the Bloodlust or whatever.
Bloodlust.
But yeah. I think we mentioned that on the Animatrix episode. But
so my pick for a double feature with Speed Racer is another movie, more recent actually, that's also based on a Japanese manga, also from a prominent director, and also a major failure at the box office, and that is 2019's Alita Battle Angel.
Oh, okay. I was worried you were going to say Ghost in the Shell.
No, I haven't seen that.
But I haven't seen either of those.
Well, I didn't watch Alita until it came out. I watched it like last year for the first time. And I watched that. I was like, we should all be ashamed of ourselves for how we treated this movie when it came out in the theater. Because it's a fucking blast.
It
is so much
I wanted to
fun.
see it. I didn't get around to it. I heard it's
that
really
was
good.
me in the theater. And it didn't do very well at the box office. And I don't think that it did very well with critics, but it is a fantastic movie. I mean, it is just super fun. It's a shame that it didn't do well. And hopefully maybe it'll have like a cult resurgence or something, and we'll get the follow-up, because it definitely ends in a way that it's opened up to sequels. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but it's really good. I mean, directed by Robert Rodriguez, co-written by James Cameron, and it stars Rosa Salazar, Christoph Waltz, Jennifer Connelly. There's some well-known people, but Rosa Salazar is a name you might not know, but she has most recently appeared in a show on Netflix called Brand New Cherry Flavor, which is really outstanding as well, especially if you're into the work of like David Lynch and specifically Mulholland Drive and Twin Peaks, or even Lost Highway. Definitely check that show out, but it's really good. But Rosa Salazar is the star of that, and she plays the title character in Alita Battle Angel. And I do remember watching it for the first time last year on HBO or something, and just going, why are people not talking about this movie? It's a blast, and it's really fun.
Well, for what it's worth, now as we're sitting here talking, I just Wikipedia'd the thing, but they said Robert Rodriguez in January 2021 said that he was still hoping for a sequel, And then later on, during an interview with the Nerdy Basement, free plug, Nerdy Basement, hit us back. Rodriguez claimed that he would try pitching Alita if the Book of Boba Fett series, which he helped direct, succeeded in knocking people's socks off.
Nice.
Well, I think the Book of Boba Fett's going to do just fine.
Yeah. Spoiler warning. Spoiler warning. It'll do well.
Speed Racer would end up being the last fully studio-funded film that the Wachowskis would make for quite a while. Their next film is a highly ambitious adaptation of a quote-unquote unfilmable novel. It would be primarily independently financed. That film, which was actually co-directed by a German filmmaker by the name of Tom Tykwer, and it is going to be the subject of our next episode. That is 2012's Cloud Atlas. Ooh. I've only seen it once. I enjoyed it when I saw it, but I know that it is a difficult film for a lot of people.
Never seen it.
I didn't expect either of you to have seen it because a lot of people didn't see it, but it's a spectacle. And I don't remember a whole lot about it, except I do remember being kind of awed by parts of it. But we'll see how it goes when we rewatch it and talk about the creation of that for our next episode.
I said the last time would be the last time I would mention that interview, but I will bring it up again just for this. That I did see Lana saying that nobody has better range as an actor than Tom Hanks. Like that, that is the greatest actor. She was talking about that they don't believe in more than one take the same way. That they're like, if you get a take, you're like, okay, well, we've already got that take. If we're not feeling it, we want to try a different take. Like, let's give them something different. Like she's like, for example, hey, that was a great take for this action scene. Now do it like your mom just died. And they were like. Jeez. And they're like, no matter what you throw at Tom Hanks, though, he just hits it every time.
That doesn't surprise me one bit.
So I love that. So we'll talk more about Tom Hanks' involvement with that next week. If you want to watch Cloud Atlas along with us, hit up cinemashock.net. We'll have links to where you can stream it anywhere that it's currently streaming online. Of course, you can always get the DVD or Blu-ray if you want to as well. Watch along, and we'll discuss that then. You can also find there on cinemashock.net all of our episode archives, links to buy merchandise, links to our Discord, links to all of our social media, pretty much everything you need to find. That's the hub to find it. So Miles, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You are Miles, for those who don't know, he's been on the show before, but if you're maybe a new listener, you might not be familiar with Miles because it has been a while, but he's the co-host of a couple of podcasts, 3 now, I think, right?
3.
You're up to 3. But I'd say your main show is still
The More You
Nerd.
Yes.
The More You Nerd.
I was
going on 10 years or so now, right?
Yeah, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And for whatever reason, I thought that I needed to make free time less of a concept to me. And so after we've been doing Cosmic Crit for 4 years now, I think.
Thanks for the invite to the 10th anniversary, by the way.
Which is a Starfinder actual play podcast. It's an RPG podcast where we play through campaigns of Starfinder. And my current, or I guess my brand new show, is Kaiju versus History, where we go through the history of kaiju films.
Yeah, so that would probably really appeal to a lot of people who listen to this show.
I agree. So that sounds fun.
Yeah, we're going through the entire canon, starting with some pre-kaiju stuff, the early 20th century, and then, obviously starting with 1933's King Kong, and then mapping everything up until 54's Godzilla, which is generally agreed upon as the first proper kaiju film. Mm-hmm. And we're just now getting out of the 50s, which is mostly a bunch of really shitty American giant bug movies. And the less said about them is the better.
There are a couple of good ones here and there.
There are. And we were largely trying to avoid some of those because they're not kaiju films, but we also wanted to show what was going on in American film as to why something like Godzilla made such an impact.
Right.
And so we're going to go through everything. Actually going to, when we end this show, I'm going to start recording that one.
Nice.
So, but yeah, those are the 3 shows. You can find me on Twitter at The More You Nerd. That's where I usually am. At Kaiju versus History, at Cosmic Crit. Instagram and Letterboxd are at Miles Will Save Us.
Nice. What about you, Todd and Gary? You want to remind everyone where you can be found?
Yes, you can follow my Star Trek podcast at Computer Resume on all of the socials. We are covering the entire Star Trek franchise in chronological order for fans new and old, and that releases weekly wherever you find your podcasts. And you can reach out to me at Mr. Todd A. Davis on all of the socials.
Hey, Matt,
my favorite recent thing was the being at a party with Todd, and people walk up to us and like, oh, what are you guys talking about? We go Star Trek, and they're just like, fucking figures.
Yeah.
I am at This Is Gary Horn, and I do have the wrestling podcast. It's at TIPW Show. We've been kind of slack, but it's coming back now. We found a lot of opportunities there for it to blossom into more. In the meantime, you can see me online over at the NWA, at NWA, National Wrestling Alliance. Doing interviews and getting bitched out by people. That's another thing I do. So,
Especially Austin Idol.
I loved watching you get screamed at by Chelsea Green. That was pretty amazing.
I legitimately almost shit my pants because that was not, despite what people think about wrestling, that was not rehearsed. Like, she was really, really fine right before that, and then we said go, and then I went to ask her a question, and then she started screaming.
I love it. And you're did you say at Rock and Roll Gary? I don't know if you said
at
that.
This Is Gary Horn.
Rock and Roll Gary.
At Rock and Roll Gary.
You won't find him there anymore.
Not anymore. And This Is Gary Horn.
This is Gary Horn, and I am at Justin_Bishop. And Miles, thanks again. If you ever need any co-host or special guest for your kaiju podcast, I'm sure any of us would love to do that.
Oh, yeah.
I think that'd be super fun. I think that'd be a fun crossover, considering the content.
I've been thinking of ways to get us all to like doing something like that. I know that Todd is doing something soon with Star Trek, and I know my co-host
he's done a few of them. Yeah,
is going to be on that soon as well. So we'll figure something out in the new year, I hope.
Very cool. And find the podcast at Cinema_Shock, Twitter and Instagram. We're on Facebook, all that stuff. Like, rate, review, all that shit. Until next week,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other.
You poor naive chump. I'm going to pretend I didn't just hear that load of sickening schmaltz. I'm going to give you a bit of an education, and at the end of it, if you're smart, you'll thank me, and then you'll sign that contract. Interesting that you and your father were so moved by the 43 Prix. One of the greatest finishes in history of racing, right? Everyone remembers Burns and Stickleton slugging it out, but who remembers Carl Potts? Driving this rebuilt Whittigan for Iodine Industries, Potts spun out in the second lap and went down as a DNF. A forgettable and pathetic finish. So bad that afterwards Iodine's stock dropped 6 points. But as Ben Burns sat guzzling cold, fresh milk in Victory Lane, 1,000 cameras taking his picture, Sirius Aeronautics saw an almost 12-point gain, which immediately blocked Peninsula Power Cell from being able to afford the price of a complete takeover. This put Joel Goldman, the CEO of Iodine, in the exact position he wanted to be in. By first buying controlling interest of his own company at a devalued price, he then brokered a merger with Sirius that immediately sent Iodine into the Gaines record book, the only record book that matters. Look out that window. There isn't a single plane or helicopter or K Harrier that isn't powered by iodine fuel cells. That's what racing is about. It has nothing to do with cars or drivers. All that matters is Johnny has the keys.
That is that was the most whiskey dick ending to this.
Well, I didn't get to do the fun part of are you ready to become a real race car driver?
Only in this show would we talk about how fucking obnoxious that speech was, and then Todd would do it at the end.
As they said it, it took everything in my power to not be like, yes.
What it really needs.
I'll say that.
What it really needs is a child and a monkey and Leonard Skinner's Freebird to really bring it home.
I love you, Todd, but I am.
I've been walking around like for the last, because we watched it 2 weeks ago. I've been walking around for 2 weeks going, are you ready to become a real race car driver? Sign a contract.
Don't do it again.
I love it.
All right, I guess we got to go now. Miles, do you have an ending?
I am not following that up.
Oh, thank you.
That's fair enough. All right. Johnny has the keys, everybody, for whatever ungodly reason still.